What's up, MMA Fighting? This is Monday, the 26th of February, 2018, and it's the Monday Morning Analyst. Thank you guys so much for watching. I greatly appreciate it. All right, so today on the show, not a moment to waste. We got to talk about that main event from UFC on Fox 28, UFC Fight Night. Stevens versus Emmett, UFC Fight Night, Orlando. If you want a full recitation of everything that happened on the card all the way down, I'll put my post-fight show for my own YouTube channel up there. You can check that out over here. But for today's purposes, you know what we have to talk about. Number one, we have to talk about that knee. But everyone's talked about the knee, and no one's really talking about how Jeremy Stevens won. So I want to do two things on today's podcast. Number one, let us take at least just a moment to look at how Jeremy Stevens won, at least in terms of dropping Josh Emmett to the floor. Now, once he gets down there, I realize it gets controversial, but he did drop him fair and square. Everybody can agree with that. So, is there a lesson to be learned there about Jeremy Stevens' striking? And then I want to talk about the knee heard around the world and everything that went wrong therein. All right? So, without a moment to lose, let's get into that now. How did Jeremy Stevens use that left hook to such great effect? And then, what can we really say about the illegal knee that landed? Here's a fact that we all have to come to terms with if any of us are in denial about it. Jeremy Stevens is a massively improved striker. He always had big power. He was always a good athlete, but he was a little bit unrefined. And you saw some of that get him a little bit in trouble here when he launched in with that rear hand uppercut that Josh Emmett was able to land, I think, the right hand and drop him with. And that was unfortunate for Jeremy Stevens, but he was able to right the ship. And look, I know that everyone's a little bit mad at him about the illegal knee, but just for a moment, try and focus here. This is a guy on a 3-fight win streak. This is a guy out there who is clearly a lot better than he used to be. You saw the leg kicks that he used against Gilbert Melendez, for example. You go back to the Doo Ho Choi fight, and then you look at that, and you look at the fight on Saturday, and what you can really say is he has a much improved jab, although he doesn't use that a whole lot. But here's what you can say. The left hook, and even just the left hand, really, of Jeremy Stevens is so powerful, he should be considered a threat to be a knockout force with either fist. Not a lot of guys you can say that about. You go look at the Doo Ho Choi fight, and what you'll notice is he switches stances into a southpaw position so he can jab with the right and then leap into range with the left. That's not a lot of guys who can do that, who want to do that, who even if they made contact could drop you with it. That is unusual. So that's one thing you can sort of note about Jeremy Stevens' power. Now, in this particular case, what happened here? I always talk about fight endings as autopsies, and I know that sounds a little gruesome and maybe it's not the right imagery, but I'm just trying to make a point here. If you show up and you see a KO, you have to ask yourself, did this punch either land or was it thrown earlier in the contest? And what you're going to see is that the answer is yes, several times. Like Cowboy Cerrone, who in last week's video you saw like to go right to the body and then left over the top. It's something similar here. Jeremy Stevens likes to finish with a left hook, and I made a compilation, you can see it above, of all the times he threw that combination, or at least tried to finish a combination with a left hand. He's really, really diligent about that. He's really, really good about always making sure that he just tries to finish his combinations the way he does. Now why is that important? Well, one, somebody's defenses might be good for the first strike of a combination and then just drop. But two, it's especially important in this case. And the reason why is because you have Jeremy Stevens, who is a bit of a rangier fighter than Josh Emmett. Even if Josh Emmett and him had the exact same arm length, you notice Josh Emmett likes to blitz into people. He likes to back them up. He likes to get into that tight range. Jeremy Stevens often has really winding, long punches. This is the perfect punch. Even if you were throwing it like a check hook, you would want to be it for the rangier outside fighter against the shorter, more inside fighter. This is the kind of punch that's perfect for that. So it's good about finishing for combos. It's good given the dynamic of how they strike and their body types and their height differential and everything else like that. It's like the perfect shot. But what you also notice with this punch with Jeremy Stevens is look at a couple times, you'll notice when he throws it, he's really out of range. He either backs up a lot of times or he just kind of sits in place. And it didn't really land at first if you're going through this footage, and you can see, number one, for the reason that he is jumping out of place, right? He's not really in a spot that he needs to be to land it effectively. And two, Josh Emmett does a lot of the right things. He either gets a hand up or he gets out of the way or he just finds some way to just not be there. But when you look at the final sequence, something changes. Here's a couple things that's amazing about this. It's the same finishing left hook. Throws a right, roll with it, throw a right, and then finish with a left hook. It's the same kind of punch in that sense. But why did this one land, and why did this one have so much effect at the end? I have a couple theories about this. Number one, you should watch Jeremy Stephens leap into position. He actually takes a big jump forward and at an angle to land this a little bit. Now, that's crazy. Now, it helped him get in range, and I think Emmett thought, well, I'm probably out of space because he had thrown it so many times and he had either blocked it or missed. He probably thought he was safe because he kind of like absorbs but blocks the right. And then when the left hook comes, I think Emmett, hands down, was just under the assumption he would be out of the way. But what's crazy about that is, it is amazing to me that Jeremy Stephens has this kind of power without this kind of seat under him. You know, they talk about sitting down on your punches, right? When you really drop your hips just a little bit and then you turn your hips over and then you turn your hips over, right? You have to like be glued to the ground a little bit. You don't want to be like flat-footed, but you have to be anchored to something to usually get that kind of power. Jeremy Stephens, it's not that he doesn't want to strike that way necessarily. He doesn't really need to in certain circumstances. He has crippling power. The fact that he can generate that kind of force with that little amount of static to the ground is absolutely shocking. No wonder he can knock guys out with his left hand. No wonder he's so good about throwing it. He can throw with a wide hook where you're not really supposed to. Remember, for like that left hook, man, you really want, you don't want the hook coming behind you, right? Because then it's kind of loose and you can't really get the right power. It's almost like a Stockton slap at that point because you're not really getting that, you're not really, you ever done like a chest fly before? You don't really get in that contraction, right? He doesn't really need all that, or at least he can just sort of keep a general tightness to throw it, and he does it leaping into range. That is absolutely crazy. Something else I would point out here, you go back to the Do Ho Choi fight, right? What happens when the guys get behind the two black lines? They either misjudge distance or they're a little bit more nervous about getting out to the left or to the right, but whatever the case, their game completely changes. Here, look at Josh Emmett. Where did this take place? Right along the fence line. Ladies and gentlemen, how many weeks am I going to come on this podcast and talk about the fact that guys' games begin to change very dramatically when they get pushed behind the two black lines? There is something to be said about how many fights are finished inside that space versus how many fights are finished outside of it in the Ultimate Fighting Championship. It is a no-go zone. Takedowns happen there way more often. Knockouts happen there way more often. Big shots, even if they're not knockouts, happen there way more often. Jeremy Stephens got dropped there in the first round, albeit for a bit of a different reason. He was coming in. But Jeremy Stephens is really, really good about pressuring guys backwards. He uses a lot of fakes, a lot of feints. He doesn't mind driving into a combination, and he always finishes it with something as well. So if it was the leg kicks against Gilbert Melendez, that was effective. If it was the stance switching, which wasn't the biggest part of it, but stance switching against Do Ho Choi, I'm going to start out in orthodox. I'm going to move left. This is going to freeze you in space. I'm going to leap into range with my left hook, even if I'm a right-handed fighter. And here in this contest, I'm just going to always make sure that I'm throwing that left at the end of these combinations over and over and over again. And maybe they don't land at first, but all it takes is for one time for your hand to be low and for you to misjudge the distance. And even if Jeremy Stephens has to leap out of position to get it, it's still going to be incredibly effective. That is a dangerous fighter, man. This is a guy who, when he can suppress his instincts to just rage brawl with you, and he really thinks through things, he is a very much improved fighter, and he is absolutely a guy who can KO you with either hand. This is a great job by Jeremy Stephens in just being, just sticking to the details, making sure he always did what he needed to, understand the dynamic of the ranginess of his punch, of the lowered height of his opponent, who want to get more like darting on the inside. Perfect punch to throw against that guy in this circumstance. Perfect context behind the two black lines. And the fact that he can do things in a very unusual way by leaping out of range. Pretty damn effective by Jeremy Stephens. Now, as good as that left hook was, obviously what followed it was plenty of controversy. Jeremy Stephens drops Josh Emmett, follows him up with a series of punches. Some of them land to the back of the head, including some elbows. And then he gets up, and there is a knee that grazes him, but clearly makes some kind of contact with him while he is absolutely a downed opponent. What do we want to say about all this? Let's start with the knee and then work our way out of there. Now, Florida, and I can't believe this is, well, it's Florida. I guess I can believe it. They have the updated unified rules, but they don't have instant replay. Here's one part of the problem. Think about this for a second. A state can have the updated unified rules and instant replay. A state can have the updated unified rules and no instant replay. A state can not have the unified rules, but have instant replay. A state can not have the unified rules or the updated ones and not have instant replay. At least 4 variants all the way across, because either you have the unified rules or you don't, and even if you do, having instant replay is not necessarily a component of that. Now, part of that's understandable because can you financially force smaller MMA organizations to have instant replay if they just literally can't afford it? I mean, how many MMA organizations are airing on some kind of network, and if they are, how many can afford it, right? I mean, this is an expensive thing to be able to do, so I understand that, but there's got to be some kind of better way to make this possible. It is just insane that in 2018 in the Ultimate Fighting Championship, we don't know if we're going to have instant replay or not based on what city we're in. This is ludicrous. It needs to be the standard everywhere we go, even if the unified rules are not. If you're European and you're watching this, you might not appreciate it, but just please hear me out for a moment. If you're American, you'll understand this completely. American football, whatever else you think about it, if you love it or you hate it, one of the benefits you can say about it is their attention to detail. Now, that might sound crazy to you because there's this big debate over what is a catch and what isn't a catch, and their rules can get complicated, and I also understand they've got their own problems to address. It's not like the way they do it is by any means perfect, nor am I suggesting that. Here's what I am saying, however. If somebody makes a call and it's wrong, it can be challenged. Or, in a lot of circumstances, no matter what the case is, the play is automatically reviewed. They at least have some kind of mechanism by a rules and then a technology aid to go back and look and say, we missed it. People are getting on Big Dan for not making a call in the moment, and maybe you want to die on that hill, but I don't. I understand that in the moment, it's just hard to know exactly what to do. It's hard to see these things in real time. The big issue for me is he has no technological means by which to go back and look at his decision and say whether or not it was a good one. That is just unforgivable. Plenty of very, very good NFL referees and umpires or whatever, because they have those in baseball now too, to an extent anyway. They have the ability to go back and look at things to make sure they got it right. Missing it in real time, forgivable. Right? Very forgivable. But us as a community not having instant replay as a given for Bellator or the Ultimate Fighting Championship, frankly, any nationally aired MMA organization is not forgivable. And it's on us and everyone else to drive this kind of change that we absolutely need. It's insane. And you can make an argument again about the NFL's inability, and even college football, about how long the games take and how stop and start it is. But a big reason of that is they're at least trying to get things right. Of course, they have their own issues too, but that's at least better than what we have, which is nothing. That's a big problem. Now, that takes us to the knee. Was it an illegal strike based on the rule? In other words, was he a downed opponent? The answer is absolutely yes. Even if it was the old rules, it would have been yes. There's some confusion about this, but let me make this clear. It doesn't matter if it's the old rules or the new rules. If your knee is down, you are down. His knee was clearly down. Let me read you the rules on this one. Kneeing or kicking the head of a downed opponent. A grounded fighter is defined as any part of the body other than a single hand or soles of the feet touching the fighting area floor. To be grounded, both hands, palm, fist down, and or any other body part must be touching the fighting area floor. A single knee arm makes the fighter grounded without having to have any other body part in touch with the fighting area floor. At this time, kicks or knees to the head will not be allowed. Okay. So there was some confusion because before you could have a hand down and you were kind of gaming the system, and then it was it 2 hands down? This one is not even one of those issues. We're not even trying to figure out, was it 2 hands down, 1 hand down? Are his fingertips just touching? Is it palms? What is it? It's so clear. The knee is down, so therefore he was a downed opponent. Did the strike land? I am not going to go back and show the footage like it's some kind of Zapruder film. He quite clearly makes contact with him. Now, whether or not he makes enough contact with it for it to matter is kind of a function of debate. I noticed on one angle that he kind of hits the arm and then it slides up and hits the knee, or slides up and hits the head and then comes back and then makes incidental contact on the way back. But the fact of the matter is, he hit him. How hard? I don't know. To me, if you're asking me, did it affect the outcome? Probably not. I don't think that it did. Here's what I know. I forgive Dan for not stopping it in real time. And if he had used instant replay after the fact, although they had stopped the fight within seconds, but if for some reason they had used instant replay at the end of the round, let's say, that would have stopped the fight too. So instant replay would not have allowed Mergliata to make a call and then the bout would have kept going. It would have stopped it no matter what. And I don't know what Big Dan would have said. But the major failing here is he never had a chance to review what happened. Maybe he would look at it and say, okay, I would have taken a point, but then the fight stopped, so it wouldn't have mattered. Maybe he would have given some kind of warning to him or some kind of admonition, some kind of, I don't know, rebuke, some kind of scolding, but then let the fight go on. That's up to Big Dan. And I'm allowed to say, I think we are all allowed to say, that referees should be given enough latitude and enough discretion to feel comfortable making these kinds of calls. I'm not going to say Jeremy Stephens should have not won that fight. I think the right guy won the fight. But here's the big issue to me, and I think this is why you all feel this way. There's never anything done to verify our own errors. If Big Dan had gone and looked at a replay after the fact and then said, you know what, I'm going to stick by the call, but Jeremy Stephens will be, closely monitored next time or something like that, and then spoken to John Anik after the fact or sat in on the broadcast and explained his reasoning, I think we'd all feel a lot better about it. But the fact that nothing is ever done, that there's no review, and that Josh Emmett, I know, is going to challenge this, and Florida, I am almost going to guarantee you will do absolutely nothing about it. They're just going to say, hey, referees have wide latitude, and that's basically true, but we at least want some kind of check in there, some kind of way to say, all right, let's just make sure. And I want to hear what this referee has to say. I do trust Big Dan. I don't really fault him for not getting it in the moment. But the fact that there's never any, it's just guesswork, and that we never go back and verify, that seems insane to me. It seems absolutely insane, and it's frustrating because I'm not saying that Jeremy Stephens cheated. I think in the this is the guy who threw a rear uppercut and got dropped. Like in the heat of battle, he just sort of is, he's a wild man, right? I'm not saying that he went out there and intentionally tried to get his way, but it is quite clear that violating the rules at MMA, whether it's intentional or it's not intentional, and deciding which is which can be hard, by the way, is not really penalized unless it is absolutely the most egregious thing on the planet. There is very, very, very little done for any kind of rules infraction, and that flies in the face of just about any other sports league. And every other sports league has their problems. I get that. No one has it all figured out. It might be impossible to figure it out, whatever that's supposed to mean, but they have a much better system about at least assigning some kind of penalty to some kind of rules infraction, right? And it is just crazy to me that we do absolutely nothing about it. And I think it's driving all of you crazy out there and souring you on it. It's one thing to say you go to one state and you've got instant replay, you go to another, you don't. It's one thing to say you go to one state, you've got the modern unified rules, you go to another one, you got the old unified rules. That's maddening enough. And then we make these referees make these incredibly difficult calls, and then we don't put them in a position to review it and then to explain to us exactly what's going on, which, by the way, in college football, in high school football, and in the NFL, when they reverse a call, they tell you why. They tell you why. We don't get any of that. We're just left in the dark, and it feels so completely unsatisfactory. So, do I think Jeremy Stephens cheated? No. Do I think the right guy won? Probably so. Probably so. But I would have liked to seen Big Dan get the opportunity to review the call, look at the evidence, and then decide what should have been done. Maybe the answer is there should have been a disqualification. Maybe the evidence to him after the fact would have shown, you know what, you just can't throw stuff like that. By the way, as a small note, people were saying even throwing a strike when they're down is incorrect. That's not true. You have to make some kind of contact. And he did. He did make at least some kind of contact. So anyway, everyone's got 1,000 opinions about this, and everyone feels like, they want to scream bloody murder, and I get it. And I think everyone feels frustrated because not only are we dealing with a completely untrackable way of making sure that there's any kind of uniformity, right? Every place we go to is so different in all manner of ways, but that we don't even use obvious technological aids when we need to be doing it, and that even in cases where we do, there's often very little done in terms of making the requisite commission official, in this case Dan Murgliata, explain to us what's going on. Just make it transparent, just be modern, and I think a lot of people will feel a lot better next time around. And last but not least, we'll take a look at what's coming up in the week ahead. 2 events for you this weekend. On Friday, March 2nd, from the WinStar World Casino in old, reliable Thackerville, Oklahoma, Darian Caldwell will face Leandro Ego. Joe Warren, that's before, of course, for the bantamweight title of Bellator. Joe Warren faces Joe Timenglow, and then Christina Williams faces Emily Ducati. I'm not sure who else is on that card for now, but that is what you should be expecting on Friday night. Then on Saturday night, you know what time it is. It is going to be UFC 222 at the T-Mobile Arena in Las Vegas, Nevada. In your main event, Chris Cyborg will be defending her women's featherweight title against Yana Kunitskaya. Frankie Edgar will be facing Brian Ortega. Looking forward to that. Sean O'Malley versus Andre Sukmantot. Stefan Struve versus Andre Arlovsky. Kat Zingano versus Ketlin Vieira. That is your main card. On Fox Sports 1, Ashley Yoder versus Mackenzie Dern. Benil Dariush versus Alexander Hernandez. John Dodson versus Pedro Munoz. Of course, that was the fight that was supposed to be at UFC Belém. CB Dalloway is back, taking on Hector Lombard. And then your opening of the Fight Pass card, Mike Pyle versus Zach Otto. Brian Caraway, Cody Stammen. And then Jordan Johnson, Adam Milstead. What did I get right? What did I get wrong? What other comments do you have? Shoot me an email, lukethomasnews@gmail.com. Thank you guys so much for watching, and until next time, enjoy the fights.